it's not just this bill that has demoralized our CBP agents. Amendment 223 decreases Section 8104 Ukraine security assistance, and this increases the spending reduction account. That was previously made in order on the prior DoD rules, both times, I think. That was for you, Mr. McGovern. So, 228, prohibition of funds to implement COVID-19 vaccine mandates. 229, prohibition of funds to fire any service member for failure to comply with COVID-19 vaccine mandates. 231, prohibition of funds for cluster munitions to Ukraine, which I think is one that Mr. Gates is already working on as well. The Homeland Amendments. The reason, I'm not going to take a time unless you want me to through questions. Secretary Mayorkas has opened up our border in a way that is thoroughly unprecedented. It is dangerous and is unprecedented. I appreciate that if you don't see what's going on at the border, it's almost impossible to understand the reality of what it is. But I worked on with my friend Mr. Gosar trying to get the Homeland Rule enacted. So I have a Homeland Rule amendment here that would defund Secretary Mayorkas. I believe he is responsible for the biggest mass migration in the history of the world. And let me tell you what it's going to be. The numbers that we have today of known gotaways, plus people who've been encountered, indicates that with the unknown gotaways, at the most conservative estimate being at least 1-to-1 with the known gotaways, by the time this administration is over, you'll be sitting at more than 10 million illegal aliens who've crossed our border. There is no doubt about that. And it is the architect of that is Secretary Mayorkas. And I've introduced impeachment for him because for a lot of reasons. But I don't have the SWAC with my colleagues to do that. So now we got the Homeland Rule. I think the Homeland Rule needs to be imposed on Secretary Mayorkas. Amendment 63 prohibits the use of funds in furtherance of the public charge ground of inadmissibility rule. Amendment 66 prohibits the use of funds to implement a TSA vaccine or mask mandate. 77 prohibits the use of funds in furtherance of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals final rule, which is, by the way, is consistent with every court opinion. And then some additional Homeland rules that need to be imposed. So in July, Judge Terry Dowdy released a 155-page memorandum ruling in the Missouri versus Biden censorship lawsuit, stating he believes the plaintiffs are likely to prove that federal government officials are targeting and suppressing free speech. In his ruling, he specifically prohibited Secretary Mayorkas and other named DHS employees from contacting, working with, or asking social media companies about posts protected by social media.
Eyes for any questions, or excuse me, any comments he cares to make about any amendment.
CISA Director Jen Easterly, CISA Director Election Security Initiative Officer Jeffrey Hale, DHS Undersecretary for the Office of Strategy, Policy and Plans Robert Silvers, and DHS Assistant Secretary for Counterterrorism and Threat Prevention Samantha Vinegard. Further, Amendment 72. This is for DHS Director of Departmental GAO-OIG Liaison Office Jim Krumpecker. Mr. Krumpecker leads the Office of GAO-OIG Liaison at DHS. Inspector General Kafari has repeatedly raised concerns to Mr. Krumpecker, and he's raised those same concerns to me and to the House Oversight Committee in testimony under oath that DHS is obstructing the IG's oversight efforts. Specifically, Inspector General Kafari's June 2023 testimony stated under oath, quote, since the fall of 2021, DHS OIG has consistently reported DHS delays and denials of DHS OIG's requests for information. These are requests for information that are more than 700 career professionals need to do their jobs, and which DHS is required to provide to DHS OIG consistent with the law. I remain hopeful that DHS will improve its responsiveness to our requests for information so that DHS OIG can continue to provide Congress and the public robust and timely oversight like that featured in today's hearing, close quote. Mr. Krumperger has still failed to provide that information. If you're going to hold that position and receive that kind of salary, you are obligated to respond to the OIG. That is the law. He's chosen not to follow that law. I think that he should be subject to the Holman Rule. And I appreciate your time and your respect, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So as not to make the same mistake twice, my very good friend, Mr. Rosenthal, you're recognized.
He's not good friends with anybody,
Well,
just
look,
for the
I try to
record.
get along with people as a rule. Gentleman's recognized for any question, or excuse me, any comments he cares to make about any amendment.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, Ranking Member McGovern, and all the committee members. I really, really do appreciate you staying around so that we can begin this so important process of getting the rules package out so that we can consider these appropriation bills. I'm excited about it. I've been waiting for this day for months now, and so we are well on our way to accomplishing our work. Many of us, just so we're clear, are ready, willing, and able to stay for as long as it takes to finally deliver the 12 appropriation bills and finally properly fund government in a responsible and transparent fashion. That's what this is all about. That's why we are here, and we will stay for as long as it takes, and we appreciate and commend you folks for staying here to join us and do the same thing. Mr. Roy so eloquently addressed and described the necessity for enforcement of the law being paramount to the efficacy of any border security plan, which includes infrastructure. You have to have enforcement of the law in order for any of those improvements to have effectiveness. And that's what this amendment is. So I submitted amendment number 142 to the fiscal year 2024 Department of Homeland Security Appropriations Bill. My amendment would prohibit funds from being used to enforce Secretary Mayorkas's memo prohibiting workforce immigration enforcement. He stopped ICE from making raids to find out where illegals were located and to remove them from our country. This would make sure that that doesn't happen anymore. The memo forces our immigration and customs enforcement agents to fight with one hand tied behind their back by removing a key method of interior enforcement from ICE's disposal. President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas' refusal to allow ICE to do their job and enforce our nation's law is a clear dereliction of duty, and it presents quite a risk to our country's national security. Put simply, my amendment would allow ICE agents to do their job and enforce our nation's immigration laws with the most effective tools possible. Some estimates suggest that upwards of 65% of illegal aliens in our country are employed. Business owners and ranchers in Montana work extremely hard to ensure that they're in compliance with federal immigration law, and this memo punishes law-abiding businesses who refuse to hire illegal aliens. Normal Americans should not be forced to compete in the labor market with illegal aliens who are depressing wages and keeping good-paying jobs away from American citizens. Under President Trump, worksite enforcement operations were commonplace, making it clear to illegal aliens and employers that there would be consequences for breaking the law that my good friend Mr. Neguse was talking about. There has to be consequences for breaking the law. There has to be a hammer. And this administration has taken the hammer and thrown it in the trash can. That's all we're trying to do, is restore that enforcement that you were talking about, that you were asking for. So my amendment would protect the American workers and force Secretary Mayorkas to allow ICE to enforce the federal law. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the rest of this committee for your time today, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. We now go to my very good friend from Indiana, Ms. Sparks, and gentlelady's recognized for make any comments about any amendments she cares.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I become a frequent guest in your committee, but I shall like your committee, and I appreciate you willing to have debate and deliberation and consideration, and that's what the democratic process in Congress should be. So I appreciate you do that. I have one amendment that I haven't discussed before. It's related to foreign Operations Appropriations Act, but I think it's very important amendment, and it's very simple amendment, but I think it's very important. All it says is, no funds from this bill, unless they were authorized by Congress, should be provided to the United Nations. And I tell you why it is very important. I think we should be authorizing all of the fund, and we can, because ultimately that's for us a way to look, what is good, what is bad, what is the organization are doing. And the United Nations doesn't have the best track record. I'll be honest with you, dealing with a lot of tough crises, whether it's in Ukraine, whether it's Africa. I haven't seen them on the ground. I've seen them in very expensive hotels, eating very expensive steak dinners. I'm paying good salaries to their staff, and people are dying. And I think we should start asking questions why. We are financing these organizations. We actually just went to the Middle East with some of my colleagues, and just with our discussion, it was a bipartisan, not a partisan concern. We were talking to a variety of countries. Almost every other country told us, oh, we're not going to give money to this corrupt organization. And why should we, at the American Congress, to do? And if it doesn't go to the people, we talk to the people on the ground, whether it's Syria or Yemen or Poland or whatever. They say, we've never seen this organization. We're not sure what they're doing. And we have some serious crises that United States taxpayers are spending a lot of money. We're generous people. We help around the world a lot. But I think we want to make sure that their money actually helps the people, not some people become very wealthy. I think these are important questions we need to ask. And I think if we haven't got through that process, and if this, actual specific spending wasn't authorized, we shouldn't be waiving these processes and let this money to be spent by Secretary of State whenever they want to spend. So I think it's a very common sense, very important amendment, and hopefully we'll do a better job with our authorization next year. I think it is number one primary function of this institution, and the only function how we can hold the other branch accountable to the American people. When we don't do that, we have no way to hold accountability. So I would appreciate for you support of this amendment. I think it's very meaningful, and honestly, if we have to give, and help some countries, maybe we should rethink how we're doing, because a lot of this international organization not helping anyone, and I think we have to be much wiser with our money as a country. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The chair has no questions. I want to make one quick comment, and I just want to, number one, thank all of you for being here as well. It's nice of you to compliment the committee, but you've spent at least as much time yourself and in more uncomfortable chairs. So, number one, thank you for being here. Number two, a number of you have mentioned the importance of considering bills individually. Actually, Dr. Burgess and I were talking about this because we arrived in the same class, and I could not agree with you more. And I will tell you, when I got here in 2003, a long time ago, obviously, we just spent a lot more time on appropriations. I mean, there's more in floor time. That really was by far the predominant thing that we did, and all those bills were brought up under open rules. So I mean, it's it was really it's a very time-consuming thing. Some of the other committees. And I can assure you, the problem is not the Appropriations Committee in terms of getting its work done. It gets its work done, but it looks at how much time they're going to get on the floor, and that determines when they're going to do their work. So that's something I just think at a leadership level. And by the way, I've seen this in both parties. I'm going to make this point not to criticize anybody, but year before last, when my friends on the other side had all three levers of power, we didn't finish till March after September, and it was an omni then. So this is a problem that's afflicting both parties, and it's a problem where we've gotten away from regular order and gotten away from emphasis on appropriations as the main job of Congress. And I think that's worth looking at institutionally in a bipartisan sense, because a number of you have made this point. I think you're exactly right. The frustration's high on both sides. I mean, the appropriations process is a process, when it's done the right way, every member can engage in. Because again, the more open rules you have, anybody can come down there, it's got an idea, put it out there and have a go. I don't know if in these days we could do it, because I did notice over the years, I mean, you get to 600, 700, 800 amendments, how do you sort through that? But it's worth thinking about, and you're all to be commended for bringing it up and making the point. And I appreciate it as an appropriator, not just as chairman of this committee, very, very much. With that, I'll go to my very good friend, the Vice Chair of the Committee, Dr. Burgess, for any questions you might care to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you bringing up the way the world was when we got here many, many years ago. I mean, I remember Tom DeLay telling us in conference, one of my first conferences that I attended as a brand new freshman, that we're coming into the appropriations part of the year, and just be prepared. We will be up here 5 days a week. We will work late most nights, and we heard a ton of amendments. And sometimes we'd hear so many amendments that there would be a mutual agreement between Republicans and Democrats that we're going to en bloc the last 150 amendments that were offered while we all heard the jet engines winding up at DCA. But it was a good process, and as a brand new member, I felt like I had a say in how the country's money was spent. And if I did anything that was too wild or too crazy, it always got stripped out in conference. But it was a good process, and I'll be happy to go through with anyone who likes my belief on the reasons why we ended that. Actually, Mr. Chairman, I have several amendments myself. They're all perfect amendments. They're well written, well thought out, and clearly germane. So I know, since I got up at 2 o'clock this morning to come back here after I unwisely followed the lead of people who were leaving the speaker's office, and I said, well, I'll just go home if that's what we're going to do. But I came back for this marathon rules session. But I do think that deserves some consideration for the amendments that I've offered. But one I just want to touch on, because I do feel it is so important, and I've offered this for several years. And Mr. Cuellar talked about, we can't just be doing a goal line defense on our border. And I agree with him. I do agree with him. In fact, in 2018, when I was chairman of the health subcommittee, I went down to Central America to investigate for myself, because we had jurisdiction over the Office of Refugee Resettlement, and it was spending a ton of cash. The per child spend in ORR, I was astounded at what it was. And it seemed to me only logical that if we want to curtail this problem to some degree, we have got to make it important to the people who should be leading and taking care of their own children in their own countries. And if we're going to expect them to do something to dissuade irregular migration, perhaps we just would simply send a per child charge to those countries. Now, look, I get it. Nobody's going to pay the bill. But if we're also sending them foreign aid, we could reduce the amount of foreign aid on a per child charge. And actually, and my numbers are not current, they're from 2022, but it was almost $2 billion for all of the children we were taking care of in Office of Refugee Resettlement. It's like anything else in Washington, D.C. If you want to make it important to someone, you make it about their money. And I saw that as a way. So, Mr. Chairman, I do have that amendment. I think I've conformed with all of the requests to make it germane. And I just hope I'd like to have that debate on the floor, like we've heard from so many here today. I want to have that debate on the floor, let members vote their will, up or down, but that's the way the body should work. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence, and I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. I recognize my good friend, the ranking member, for any questions he may have for the panel.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me welcome the panel. Finally, a panel that includes people who are in charge around here. Dr. Burgess just went through wistfully all the things that used to be and things that he wished were in place today. You all have as well, but I'll remind you, you're in charge. You can't blame Nancy Pelosi for this. You can't blame Joe Biden for this. The Republicans control the House of Representatives. You can have as many open or closed rules as you want. Not only has the appropriations process been a complete mess, but the process in general has. And this is not a slight to my friend, Mr. Cole, because I know he is on the side of more openness, but there have been 37 completely closed rules this year. That's more closed rules to date than the previous two Congresses. On amendments, this Congress, 73% of amendments have been blocked. Over 61% of Republican amendments have been blocked. And so, I point that out. But what I'm trying to figure out here is like where we are and where are we going. So these appropriation bills are being brought up one by one, which I think is the way they should be brought up. But there are still a couple of, I think it's 2 appropriation bills that haven't been reported out of committee yet, okay? So we're not going to get to all 12, no matter how fast we move next week. And if you were here earlier, I mean, obviously, there is disagreement with the White House on the substance of some of these bills. There's disagreement with Senate Democrats on some of these bills. There's disagreement with Senate Republicans on some of these bills. So there is going to have to be this kind of give and take. And I don't think under any scenario do we pass 12 appropriation bills next week. The Senate does the same. We reconcile the differences, and we have our product. The government shuts down a week from tomorrow if we don't do anything. And we've had a couple of attempts at a continuing resolution that have been brought before the Rules Committee. Continuing resolutions that in my opinion, don't reflect my values. I couldn't vote for them because of the deep cuts, but nonetheless, they were brought up here and then they were pulled. So I'm just trying to figure out, given the realities that we're dealing with and the moment of time we're in, are all of you going to vote for a continuing resolution?
Tell you, if you don't mind
Yes,
yielding.
yeah.
Yeah, Mr. McGovern, I'm not going to vote for a continuing resolution. We got to break the fever. We got to kick the habit. The reality we face is a $33 trillion debt that both parties have contributed to, that neither party has developed a process to constrain since the mid-90s. But I would point to the fact that in the mid-90s, when we had divided government, when we had a President Clinton and Speaker Gingrich, we were able to go through this process. And I would observe that even if we had to endure a small shutdown, a week, that the work that we could do to get these individual bills out and negotiated in divided government would be worth it. And I don't favor a shutdown. I want to move as fast as possible. We may even have bipartisan agreement to move faster than we have in the past. There's no question that you're right, that there is no one that we can blame the lack of the production of these bills on but ourselves. And I own that as a Republican, but as I think Mr. Cole correctly observed, we've been following a bipartisan tradition. And I think that this system, that this rule that the committee I hope passes, and I hope the House passes, gets us back on a track where we negotiate these things in the way that Mr. Burgess reflected on, not negotiating what feature of a continuing resolution is or is not going to be part of that calculus.
And I want to, yeah, I want to. Everybody can answer. I want a process in which we do that as well. But I'm looking at the date and when time runs out, and so that is, I mean, that is where I appreciate your candor, the appropriate and we will. You're in charge. You bring what appropriation bills you want to bring to the floor. I would just argue what was a little bit different is I think there was a lot more discussion across party lines in previous Congresses, quite frankly, to get to deals, whether they're continuing resolutions or whether they're omnibus bills, which we would want to move away from. And I'm just telling you right now, there's no discussions between your leadership and Democrats in the House, nor do I know that there's any.
Mr. Chairman, we don't leadership.
I know, I appreciate that. Yeah.